Is called paragraphs and sentences. Just want to make sure you know that all this material that I'm going to present now is at this website here. So I'm sure Stan will post it as well, but it is, if you go to the website right now, all I've done pretty much is taken bits and pieces of what's in that website under both paragraphs, sentence, I think it's called sentence variation, and just basically cut and paste it into here so we can walk through it together. Now, as you know, when you talk about paragraphs and sentences, so much of it comes down to style, to personal preferences, but there are tips and tools that I think are particularly useful and particularly important, especially as you continue to do what we talked about yesterday, which is kind of build up your basics. So let's walk through. First, I'm just going to go through paragraphs, then we'll go through sentences. I don't have as many, there weren't as many examples on the website in terms of paragraphs, but I think what you'll see, what we go through, does present some tips, and then visually speaking also helps you to see or think about certain things. And when we get to the end, after paragraphs and sentences, I'll also have a concrete assignment so that you all can continue to work with the person working with you on some of the very specific things that we will take a look at. All right, so let's start out with paragraphs. And just quickly, what is a paragraph? Right, as it says here, a collection of related sentences dealing with a single topic. And I'm not going to read everything that's there, but again, paragraphs are a key aspect, a key component of writing because they provide a structure both visually, right, as well as content. And some of the common mistakes are that the paragraphs are not necessarily focused. Or are not related to each other. So let's take a look at one of the basic rules, right? Keep one idea to one paragraph. Now, obviously there are certain times where you can break these rules, but the important thing, I think, is making sure that you have the basics down. So especially if you're struggling with your writing a little bit, or you're looking to kind of build up those basics, keep that as a basic rule of thumb, right? One idea that you develop in one paragraph, if you start a new idea, right, then you start a new paragraph. So in the paragraph, you want to be building things up around a particular idea that you're presenting. Comments or questions so far? Yes? Okay. And again, all of this is in that particular website. If you want to go back and see it at any time. And when you do your assignment, I'll make sure the website is up there so you can go back and revisit some of this if you have some other questions. All right. Generally, what are the elements of a paragraph in terms of what are you looking for? And I know some of this seems really technical, so especially if you start to blur over a little bit in terms of your eyes start to glaze, you can't quite capture it. Don't worry as much about the technical terms. Think more about the concepts, right? So the terms that are used are unity, coherence, topic, sense, and adequate development. Unity just talks about what we talked about just now, right? It should have one idea that you're developing, right? Start another idea, start another paragraph, right? Coherence is basically an understanding of how are you developing that paragraph, right? You want to make sure that you are building up your ideas, you have a good flow of argument, your progression of logic is one that is clear, and so there's talk about logical bridges, right? So the same idea, that topic is carried over from sentence to sentence within the paragraph. Right, and verbal bridges so that you're linking these sentences together in one way or another. Again, it's when you get your hands on it, when you're working with the person with whom you're working, these things will become clearer if in fact it's something that you need to work on. And I know with some of the students with whom I'm working, many times as I'm going down and commenting to somebody, this will look familiar, right? In terms of stated this way in a little bit more technical. Questions or comments so far? Okay. The topic sentence, right? So we talked about unity or coherence. Topic sentence basically just means trying to find a way to let the person know what this paragraph is about, right? How are you going to introduce it? Again, you can think about examples in your own work, in your own papers, as you go through paragraph to paragraph. As you start a new paragraph, you're introducing a new idea. That's kind of your topic sentence. It generally goes at the beginning of the paragraph, but sometimes, depending on your style, depending on how you might want to craft things, you may wait a little bit longer to get to it. Again, this is very, very technical, but I think when you get into practice, if in fact these are things that you might want to work on, they help you to see certain things that you might not have seen before. Am I going too fast? Is it okay? So far? Okay? when we get to sentences, this will bleed over into some of the sentence stuff as well. Adequate development. Sometimes you'll see that you will be struggling with paragraphs because you feel, well, I don't have much to say. My paragraph is only one sentence long, right, or 2 sentences long. Generally, that's an indication, right, that that probably is either not developed enough. In other words, if you're not giving the reader enough material in that paragraph to really make sense of why you think it's important to have that as an aspect of your paper or as an independent paragraph, or it may mean that probably that particular thought probably fits in another paragraph where you've already talked about it in some way or shape or form, and it's just a matter of blending that back in. And as we'll see, you know, if you have a paper where visually speaking, you know, long paragraph really short, long paragraph really short, instead of fairly balanced, it's probably an indication that one of these things that we just went through needs a little bit of work. Questions or comments on that? Okay. So how do you know when to start a new paragraph? Begin a new idea or point, that's pretty much automatic, right? If you're starting something new, it should be a new paragraph. Sometimes also, though, to contrast information or ideas. So it may not be a completely new idea or new that you are presenting, but it may just be that you want to comment on the previous one and contrast it, which really is kind of a form of a new idea. Right? When your readers need a pause, right? If you find a monstrous paragraph, right, one that's just going on and on and on and on and on, you really need to find a way to break that up, because just visually speaking, for the reader to be able to really capture what is in that very, very long paragraph, it becomes more and more difficult the longer it is. Just visually speaking, it's just kind of one of the ways that we're made. So that's one of the indications. I know when I write, I tend to write really, 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 really long paragraphs when I first write. And then when I go back and edit, that's when I start looking at, okay, how do I chop these things up to make the structure, to make it balanced. And also I'll start seeing certain things where, you know, this really is a really good place to begin a new paragraph because it does one of these two things here, right? And when you're ending your introduction or starting your conclusion, right, the introduction and the conclusion can be made up of several different paragraphs, but when you're starting or ending these things, right, generally you'll have a new paragraph that starts there. Kind of, again, it's a new idea, kind of wraps things up. Comments or questions? Fun stuff. All right. Also, one more thing about paragraphs, and you've all probably heard this many, 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 many times about transitions, right? In terms of really needing to make sure that you are linking one paragraph with another. Right? You want to make sure that your flow of argument is consistent, that you're building on what you said before, that you're pointing to the way ahead. And so, generally, technically speaking, again, don't pay too much attention to the technical terms that they throw you off. Pay attention more to the concepts. Right? Signposts. Many times you will arrive at a point in your paper where it's just a good idea to remind the reader what you've covered so far and where you're going. That's kind of a signpost. Transitions are a little bit different, right? That's making sure that as you go from one paragraph to the next, that you have a tie-in. It can be just one word, right? It could be meanwhile, it could therefore, it could be something along those lines. There's a little bit of discrepancy about whether transitions should come at the end of most paragraphs or at the beginning of the next one. And a lot of that is style. And you should try to figure out, you know, what do you prefer? Do you prefer to end a paragraph that leads into the next one, or do you prefer to end it and then start the next one referring back to the one? I kind of prefer the second. And a lot of times when I do have some students that prefer the first, and I'll point out to them, I think here actually putting it at the beginning of the next paragraph works better, but that may just be my stylistic preference. You know, you all make the final determination in terms of what you think flows better. Comments or experience, especially in terms of transitions of signposts? Karen?
I think I learned how to do that a lot by what they mentioned maybe it was you mentioned last night, by reading good writing. Pick up how writers do that well, and then kind of absorb it.
That's a great point. I think I learned that the same way, because this is probably, if I had to point to the most common difficulty that I find in the papers at the graduate level I read, it's this transition. It's keeping that flow of argument going, is of linking things together so that the reader sees, oh yeah, that makes sense. This then leads to that, then leads to that in terms of your argument. Right? Other comments on that? Diane, would you agree? I mean, I know you've looked at a lot of...
Yes, I would, that the transition can be difficult. I'm with you, I tend to transition at the beginning of a paragraph, and the urge is to correct to my preference rather than letting the students determine what is their preference.
Oh, that sound thing is so tough, isn't it? Any other comments that people have experienced or thoughts on that? Yeah, Dan.
David, with signposts, would you have any suggestions in terms of the number of points that you're trying to put across when you utilize a signpost? You know?
I don't. Again, I think signposts tend to be, shall we say, potentially a little bit more advanced in a sense. Generally, when you're writing a paper, and of course it depends on the kind of paper, you probably won't have this as much in a reflection paper. You may have something at the beginning, but especially if you're doing a research paper, when you're starting kind of a next major section, many times it's nice to summarize. You know, we just finished looking at boom, 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 boom. Now we're going to take a look at this, right? You want to do that in your introduction anyway, where you set out the paper as a whole. But if it's a longer paper, if it's research, you know, the readers are going to lose a little bit of track of why you're tackling this, what you're doing. So you want to keep reminding them. You want to make it easy on them to see why it's important that you're covering this particular subject. So, good question. No, I think that's more a matter of feel. Obviously, it helps if you give somebody the paper that you're writing at some point and ask them, you know, can you follow this well? You know, does this bear? Is it fairly clear? I remember reading. There was a book. Book manuscript that somebody gave me, and I think it was the first or second chapter. She gave it to me, and it was not divided into sections at all. And I said, Julie, you know, this. I mean, I think it's great what you have, but it's really hard to follow because it's not kind of organized in a way that helps the reader see with section headings and things like that, kind of what you're doing. She said, no, you're absolutely right. This was just kind of a first draft. So I think probably many, if not most of us, tend to write first by kind of just dumping everything we can think of and then going back and editing and organizing it in a way that makes it clear. And I think looking out for signposts especially, and where you might put these kind of markers that help people remember where you are is important. Other thoughts? Yeah.
Well, I think that's important in that, you know, I think sometimes writers think that they're being redundant or repeating themselves, and they don't realize that, you know, you have the argument already present. You know, you read it and everything is already present to you as the writer, but for the reader, they don't have that same experience of knowing the argument in advance.
Great point.
And so I think sometimes people are reluctant to be, they think, oh, I'm just repeating themselves, and it's not necessarily that way for the reader.
That's a great point, and I think what we can do is build on that comment and say, especially when you're talking about structure of the paper, reminding your readers what the structure is and why you've set it up that way, where you've been is useful. What you don't want to get into is in your sentences or your paragraphs having a lot of redundancy there, right? That takes away from it. But, you know, in terms of signposts, as you're starting things out or as you're concluding things, having those signposts, that's really, really useful. Thanks. Good. Other comments? And again, this may not, because we're talking a little bit abstract and we don't have examples in front of us, you may not grasp it right now, but hopefully if as you work afterwards on this and there is something where it can be added, the person you're working with or you might even remember, you can kind of look and see, you know, does what I have really lend itself to some of what we're talking about? All right, just in terms of paragraphs, kind of what we already talked about, one main idea for paragraph. 3 or 5 more sentences per paragraph. Again, these are just kind of rules of thumb that you don't necessarily have to adhere to, right? It really depends, and there are always going to be exceptions. As we talked about, if there are a few very short paragraphs, they might be really better presented as part of a larger paragraph. You check on whether your paragraphs are balanced by looking at your paper. So just even visually, just take a quick look at. This is the website here that I was talking about. So here are some examples of kind of some balanced pages, right? These are paragraphs here, so just visually speaking, you can see, you know, relatively similar in terms of their length. Unbalanced pages, let me just scroll down a second. Right, and that might look kind of familiar to some of you all in your own writing, right? All of a sudden you kind of look at your own writing and you have a really long one and a short one. Really, really short one, kind of, and that probably again is an indication that there's a little bit of work to do, right? Because it's some of the things that we, some of the things that we went through. So if you look at, just in terms of graphics, you know, that's probably, and again, you know, it's not going to look absolutely perfect with the, you know, you don't want to fill in the boxes, but just in terms of the structure of the paper, you know, is it helpful to the reader, to their eye, to be able to kind of pick things out, to even be able many times to see if these things are organized well. It's even an aid to help them follow your argument. Most of the time as people are reading, it's been proven they're going to pay attention mostly to the first few sentences of the paragraph. By the time you get to the end of the paragraph, right, they're not paying as much attention, right? And that's the same thing with the paper. Mostly people will read the introduction, probably some of the conclusion, but as the conclusion tapers off towards the end, they're not reading that. Remember once there was a contest that somebody did where they put something, I think it was the very last sentence, they said, you know, and if you read this sentence, then I will pay you $5 or something like that. And out of, I don't know how many hundred people, I think it was maybe 2 or 3 actually read it and got the $5, right? So it's just, again, that's an indication that, again, those topical sentences that you want to be really strong at the beginning where the readers are really paying attention. Does that make sense? Okay. All right. Let's then turn to sentences. So that's all that we have on paragraphs.
Can I do my
Yes.
pet peeve about paragraphs in terms
Please.
of looks? Office 2007 and I think 2010 default to an extra space between paragraphs, which makes it appear as though you're starting a new section, and it's I find as a reader very difficult to read. So you have to go back into the line spacing and remove the space between before and after paragraphs, please.
So you're
and
talking.
please indent your paragraph.
Right. So that's good. We actually didn't talk about indentation or anything. So thank you for bringing that up. So generally, what Karen is saying, right? So here's the margin, right? So you start a paragraph here. You have that, right? Then if you start a new paragraph, you'll indent it, go here. Many times, stylistically speaking, you may not have a heading, but you may start a new section, right? Because, again, you want to, whoops, you want to kind of make a new point. Again, stylistically speaking, but what you're saying is that when you go from here to indent this one there, that it kind of adds another space.
It
Is that
does.
what you're saying?
It makes
Okay.
it 3 spaces or 4 instead of double space,
Okay, all right.
or you know, whatever you're
Double space.
Yeah, double.
Yeah. Right, especially if you're doing a double space and it's really a lot of space. And that's the other thing also, just even in terms of the presentation, I believe somebody spoke about this yesterday. The presentation of your paper is really important, right? You're in graduate school, you want to make it look professional. If you do have just all kinds of spaces, if you have different fonts, sometimes it'll get away from you. You're working in 12 fonts, something happens, maybe you cut and paste a reference, all of a sudden you're in 11 font. You should be able to spot that as you go through. If you don't, it just makes it look sloppy. It makes it look like it's not professional. And I know it may seem like a little thing, but it's big because it begins to present an image of your capacity, right, frankly speaking. And especially if you are trying to appeal to an audience, make particular arguments, but especially if you're writing grants or if you're doing something else, it just puts a little bit of a doubt in people's mind, right? So that presentation, the attention to these nitty-gritty details is so important, right? Really, really important.
Yeah, I would emphasize that. I think what happens is once you notice an error, it's like you think, well, what else is there? And, you know, I mean, in other words, if things look clean, you kind of, the expectation is set up that this is, I mean, obviously the content has to be there, but the reverse is kind of true. You start to see errors, and then you start to, it's almost natural to start wondering if there are more.
Great point.
When you're looking around.
And if your presentation is really, really clean, right, you can get away with some stuff that otherwise you couldn't, right? You can get away with a few typos, but if the first thing, if the presentation is not clean, that is, I agree 100%. All of a sudden your image, just because of the presentation, is you've kicked that person down a couple notches already in terms of you're wondering, you know, is this person really have a high level of capability? And again, it may sound trivial, but believe me, it's not. Andre Agassi, many years back, you know, had these commercials talk about image is everything. Unfortunately, in this, image is much of a lot of the things in terms of forming those impressions. Questions or comments about that? So every little detail, pay attention to that, especially the font, especially the spacing.
Is there a preferred font?
Not really. Different journals have different styles, right? We use the APA style here, and sometimes they will specify the font as well. I mean, traditionally 12-point font is what you use. Now we've moved to Calibri 11 font. A lot of kind of that's where it defaults to. So no, I mean, generally, hopefully, in terms of your papers, the professors will be specifying that. I used to use Times Roman 12 a lot. But Calibri, for some reason, just seems, especially when I'm typing, it seems to look a lot better. And so Times, to me, seems really packed and condensed now. It really, again, is a style thing, but usually people will specify if there is a preference. Does anybody have a preference in terms of font or style or anything else yet?
Well, you save a lot of money printing stuff off if you use a sans serif font, and ink is expensive.
What is sans serif? How would you identify that?
That means, yeah, go ahead.
Times is a serif font. You'll notice the little line, like if you imagine the I and imagine the line at the top and the bottom, those are the serifs. And so like Helvetica or Calibri would be sans serif. They have, you know, they're just straight lines as opposed to having those little things.
Fun to learn about this stuff, thanks. Yeah.
I've heard that Arial is a good font for English as second language people because it's very clean and it's a little bigger. I think.
Arial 12,
12.
11, that's 12. Yeah, it is a little bit bigger, that is true. Good question. Other thoughts or questions? Okay. All right, so let's go on to sentences then. We start a little bit late, so I still have a little bit of time. Is that right, Stan? Okay, I'm gonna go through this a little bit quickly, again, because that information is there. So a couple of strategies just in terms of sentence writing, right? I'm going to assume that we all know what a sentence is, a structure, but many times writing can be a little bit bland, right? And so a lot of that blandness comes because sentences are the same length. They kind of all look the same, all feel the same, all kind of sound the same. So now we're kind of getting to stylish kind of stuff to really kind of draw the readers in to make them have fun as they're reading things. So one of the ways of kind of spicing things up a little bit is to vary the rhythm by alternating short and long sentences. So let's take a look. Here's one example, right? I'll read it out loud so you can kind of feel it. The Winslow family visited Canada and Alaska last summer to find some Native American art. In Anchorage stores they found some excellent examples of soapstone carvings. But they couldn't find the dealer selling any of the woven wall hangings they wanted. They were very disappointed when they left Anchorage empty-handed. There's nothing, oops, forgot a period there. There's nothing wrong with this, right? But again, kind of feel the rhythm. It's kind of boom, 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 right? It's not quite short, choppy sentences, but it's kind of the same rhythm. So I'll just look at an example in terms of what it might, how you might vary it. Now, kind of take a look, right? You have sentence, sentence. You have sentence, 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 and sentence. There should be a period there. Now look at the difference, right? Longer sentence, shorter sentence, longer sentence, shorter sentence, right? Again, somehow when I cut and pasted this, I left out the periods. I'm sorry. So the Winslow family visited Canada and Alaska last summer to find some Native American art, such as soapstone carvings and wall hangings, right? So all they did was kind of combine those two. Anchorage stores had many soapstone items available, short and sentence. Still, they were disappointed to learn that wall hangings, which they had especially wanted, again, they kind of included that, right, as a dependent clause, were difficult to find. Sadly, they left empty-handed. Does that give you kind of a sense, right? They're kind of looking for ways to kind of vary things, to combine things, to make it more appealing. Just another example as well. Let's go through this one real quick. All right, example. Many really good blues guitarists have all had the last name King. They have been named Freddie King and Albert King and B.B. King. The name King must make a bluesman a really good bluesman. Bluesmen named King have all been very talented and good guitar players that claim that a name can make a guitarist good may not be that far-fetched, right? I mean, not, the information's there, right? You can make it, but it's not, right? It needs something more, right? It's just kind of.
It's boring.
Yeah. Right. So revision, okay. And this is where the crafting comes, right? This is where your creativity comes, right? That you want to play around with stuff, right? What will communicate what you want to say, kind of with a little bit more verve, right? So what makes a good bluesman? Starting off with a question always is a great way to draw people in, right? Maybe, just maybe, it's all in the stately name. B.B. King, Freddie King, Albert King. It's no coincidence that they're the royalty of their genre, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, right? So you get the idea. So one thing that you want to look at in your assignments, you know, is does your writing look more like this? And if it does, right, that's when you start playing around with it, right? And so if you can identify the fact that you are writing right now in these kind of short, kind of staid sentences, play around with some of the things that's contained in this material. Have fun with it. All right, another way is to vary the sentence openings, right? If too many sentences start with it, the, this, or I, right, again, that kind of makes it a little bit boring. So let's take a look at some examples. Right, the biggest coincidence that day happened when David and I ended up sitting next to each other at the Super Bowl. Again, nothing terribly wrong with this, right? It communicates it. But again, the biggest coincidence, I mean, you can probably do better than that. And I'm just going to run through a few because there are quite a few. Right, so vary the sentence openings. Instead of having the beginning, or it, or I, right? Coincidentally, David and I ended up sitting next, in an amazing coincidence, David and I ended up sitting next to David at the Super Bowl was a tremendous coincidence. But the biggest coincidence, when I sat down, see how there's ways that you can vary it, right? To make it, help draw the readers in much more. I'm just going to run through, these are other examples there, right? Let me just run through a little bit of sentence types. Again, this gets a little bit more technical, but it sets us up, again, to show how you can work on your sentence variation a bit and tackle some of the problems in terms of the way that your sentences are structured. So just quickly, right? There are different types of sentences, right? A simple sentence, an independent clause, and no dependent clause. Independent clause just means what? That it can stand on its own, right? That sentence can stand on its own, right? So man enjoyed, it's a complete sentence. Enjoyed taking the hayride with you. China's Han Dynasty marked an official recognition of Confucianism, right? So those are simple sentences that they have. An independent clause just means that the sentence itself, or that clause, that portion of the sentence can stand on its own, right? It's a complete sentence. Correct me if I'm wrong in terms of grammar, right? Compound sentence, another type of sentence, right? Where a simple sentence is just that independent clause, that one that can stand on its own. Sentence with multiple independent clauses. So, the clown frightened the little girl and she ran off screaming. What are the two independent clauses here? What are the two sentences that can stand on their own? Anybody?
The clown frightened and she ran off.
Right, the clown frightened the little girl and then she ran off screaming, right? If I took away this, took away the and, right, which joins them together, both of these sentences stand on their own. They're both independent clauses, right? What you notice here is that they join them, right? So instead of kind of having two short, choppy sentences, you had one that was a little bit longer that kind of flows a little bit better, right? So that's a compound sentence. Same thing with that one there. All right, complex sentence has, again, these independent clauses with one independent clause and one dependent clause. Dependent clause means it can't stand on its own, right? Depends on the other sentence. It's not a complete sentence by itself, right? So after Mary added up all the sales, she discovered that the lemonade stand was 32 cents short. What is the dependent clause? What is the sentence there that can't stand on its own, or the clause that can't stand on its own?
Sales.
Right, after Mary added up all the sales, right? If I put a period there, that's not a complete sentence, right? But she discovered that the lemonade stand was 32 cents. That can stand on its own. So a complex sentence is just a way of describing, right, a different way that you can have put a sentence together is having one that can stand on its own together with one that can't stand on its own, right? And it gives you now a sense that you can start combining things. And a complex compound sentence just means that there's all kinds of stuff in there, right? I won't go through the technical details. So Catch-22 is widely regarded as Joseph Heller's best novel, right? That could be, period, that's an independent clause. And, you already know that is, what's that called technically? What is the end?
Coordinating conjunction.
Okay, thank you, yes. And because Heller served in World War II, right, because Heller served in World War II, that can't stand on its own, which the novel satirizes the zany but savage wit of the novel packs an extra punch. So you can see that's kind of a neat sentence, right? It's a complex compound sentence kind of close spot. All right, so why is this useful? Because if you have kind of these short, choppy sentences, right, you can look at joining them together in various ways, right? And so let's take a quick look at some of these. So you can combine sentences with conjunctions, right? And conjunctions are these and, but, or, not yet, or so. And some example, for example, Doonesbury cartoons satirize contemporary politics. Readers don't always find this funny. They demand that newspapers not carry this truth. Okay, again, nothing wrong, straightforward of it. It's boom, 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 right? Let's dress it up a little bit, right? Using some of these conjunctions. Here's the example. Doonesbury cartoons laugh at contemporary politicians, but, so they use the but readers don't always find this funny and demand that newspapers not carry this truth. Now, I would probably put a sentence period there and have something else. But that's one example where you can combine these. Now, we don't want you to write these marathon sentences, right? but it is a way that instead of short, choppy sentences, you can create sentences of varying lengths. Make sense? I know I'm speeding through this. Am I going too fast? You'll have a chance to practice some of this afterwards. And the other thing is, you can also link the sentences not just with conjunctions, but with what is called subordination, right? And so you can use the, what is it?
Subordinating conjunctions.
Thank you. Subordinating conjunctions. I know who to go to here, right? to show the relationship, and again, it dresses it up. And these are all kinds of different subordinating conjunctions. After, although, as if, though, etc., etc., etc. Okay, so let's take a look quickly at an example. So linking through subordination, so the example here is the campus parking problem is getting worse. The university is not building any new garages. Again, kind of short and choppy, right? So let's look at what you could say. The campus problem is getting worse because the university is not building any new. Okay, what's the subordinated conjunction there? Right, so you added that. Another example, the U.S. has been highly dependent on foreign oil for many years. Alternate sources of energy are only now being sought. Again, nothing wrong with it, but if you have many of these short, choppy sentences, you might want to try to vary it a little bit. Although the U.S. has been highly dependent on foreign oil for many years, alternate sources are only now being sought. What's the subordinate conjunction? Although, right? Okay. Makes sense? Again, things that you can try and play around with to spice up your writing. Also, if you have repeated subjects or topics, right? Maybe you're finding that you're saying kind of the same thing over and over again in terms of using the same parts of speech, or the things are just are repetitive, right? You've probably come across that where somebody's commented to you, you keep repeating kind of the same thing here in the paragraph. Well, then one way, right, of trying to fix that up is to use different parts of speech, right? And again, understanding that there are ways that you can link sentences together helps you understand that. So one is to embed one sentence inside another using a clause that starts with what is called a relative pronoun. Just kind of focusing on the words, on the concepts here, if you have trouble with kind of those technical details. Let's look at some examples, right? So here are the pronouns or the words, the relative pronouns which you can use. The example, Indiana used to be mainly an agricultural state. It has recently attracted more industry. Two kind of sentences, boom, boom. Indiana, which used to be mainly an agricultural state, has recently attracted more industry. Kind of a little bit more attractive writing there. One of the cameras was not packed very well. It was damaged during the move. You can see the pattern here, right? That in this particular thing, you have starting with it that refers to the cameras, right? You have Indiana, it here as well to get rid of that it, right? You use one of these relative pronouns. So the camera that was not packed very well was damaged during the move, right? Okay. So again, just kind of some examples here. I'm not going to throw these. Those are more examples as well. I'm just looking at the time a little bit. Sorry about that. Another thing, again, if you find that there's a lot of repetition going on, you might want to eliminate a be verb, right? So I am, is, was, were, and substitute what's called the participle, right? And so the participles are you have present participles. And again, this gets really technical. I have to tell you, I mean, before I kind of read this material, I didn't remember any of this stuff, right? So I'm just kind of focusing on the words and what they're saying, right? So those are a variety of ways that you can think about it. Let's look at some examples. Wei Shi was surprised to get a phone call from his sister. He was happy to hear her voice again. See, his sister, he, right, her, there's all kinds of stuff going on there. Can we kind of get rid of kind of those repetitions there? Wei Shi, surprised to get a phone call from his sister, was happy to hear her voice again, right? So you eliminated, right, a lot of is and he's in there. You made it a lot tighter. Okay. Comments? Questions? Okay. And a couple more there. Or surprised to get a phone call from his sister where she was happy to hear her voice. Also, you can turn a sentence into a prepositional phrase. Again, that's just a technical way of saying that you can use a bunch of these different words to link the sentences together, right? About, above, across, after, and all that kind of stuff. So the university has been facing pressure to cut its budget and has eliminated funding for important programs. Under pressure to cut its budget, the university has eliminated funding for important programs. Again, so you get rid of the it here, right? And you have a sentence that avoids that repetition there. Okay, let's see. You can also, and again, all this material is there, so if you want to go back and kind of review it as you kind of play around with your assignment, depending on what you feel is a need there. You don't have to remember all this. So also another way is if you want to vary the rhythm of the sentences, so you can put clauses and phrases at the beginning of some sentences with the after, although as if. You can start seeing a pattern here in terms of the beginning sentences a little bit more differently. So if you have those dependent markers, how might you use them in an example here? The room fell silent when the TV newscaster reported the story of the earthquake. So you can use one of those words, right? When the TV newscaster reported the story of the earthquake, the room fell silent. Right? So here you just kind of go along, the room fell silent when the TV newspaper reported the story of the earthquake. Here, when the TV newscaster reported the story of the earthquake, the room fell silent. So you kind of break it up and have a little bit different. Alright, so I'm just going to do more there. Also, you can have, right, vary the rhythm by adding transitional words at the beginning of some sentences. Notice the way that you begin a sentence is a pattern that we're noticing, right? You can use things to, again, vary the rhythm there. So fast food corporations are producing and advertising bigger items and high-fat combination meals. The American population faces a growing epidemic of obesity. It's a little bit dense, right? Can we get it to where it's a little bit more attractive? Fast food corporations are producing and advertising. What? No. Meanwhile, right? Meanwhile, the American population faces a growing epidemic of obesity. So this kind of links it in, right, with what it is there. Whereas before, the link was kind of inferred. Here you're making it more specific, right? Meanwhile, at the same time. Okay, so your assignment then is review the papers or the work that you're working on, right? And look particularly at your paragraph balance. Okay. Look at the paragraph unity, coherence, topic, sentence, and adequate development transitions, right? So take a look at your paragraphs first. Go to your paper, how do my paragraphs look? Second of all, as you're looking, are there any particular parts of your paper where potentially you can improve the content of the paragraphs itself, right? What's in them? Do you have a topic sentence there? Are they all addressing just one idea, right? Was that idea of unity? Are they built up well? Look then, go to the sentence. Do you have, what does your paper look like within the paragraphs? Are there short, choppy sentences? Or is there a lack of sentence variation rhythm? And, if you identify any problems here, and work on some of the alternatives for them, drawing on what we just talked about. Let me I'll leave up for a while that website. So if you want to go and kind of take a look at any example that I cited, you can just have that up there as well. Al English Produce, or even if you just Google or search Al English, that will come up. Okay? Questions or comments? Yeah, I'm sorry it took a little bit more time than what was wanted.
There's also a link to that on the Blackboard site, and it goes directly to the academic writing portion of OWL.
So what I would just say, don't try to tackle too much of your paper, but have fun with it now. Kind of take a look at what you've written, or if you haven't written, you kind of just attempt to write something, and just play around with some of the things that we talked about. Okay, have fun. And you have, how long does it stand?
Till noon. Technically at noon they're supposed to be with their tutors, and then we have lunch at 1.
Okay, so there's quite a bit of time, right?
Yep.
Okay. So you may want to, if you already have something written already, even sit down yourself, kind of make your way through it, see what you identify, then see if your tutor identifies the same thing.
Yeah, I'll take some of your writing maybe and look at some of the sentence and say, okay, what do you think about this sentence with your tutor?
I would say start with the paragraphs, make sure the paragraph structure looks, that you're comfortable with it, or whatever you've written, right? And then from there, go down to the sentence level after you kind of dealt with the paragraph, just so you have a systematic approach. And thank you all for your participation as well.